streaming and I'm on, you're muted, but just I'm going to hang up on you when you're set. So just tell me on my phone here when you're good, and we're ready to go. Just let me give you a message here, and I'm going to hang up on your Teams when that happens. And thanks everyone for hanging with us as we got going a little later than expected, logistics being what they are. And we're just double checking to make sure that the stream is running live. And when it is, we'll take it to the stage, or whatever we call this. So just waiting for our team to confirm that is the case. And I think we're getting a high sign. Looks good. Okay, very good. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Appreciate you taking the time. And wonderfully, we've got this guru here, Dan Sullivan, who's been in the many areas of technology, including Google Cloud from the early days. I'm not the guru. I'm the talking head here to talk to Dan and kind of get a little bit of what he's all about and what his thoughts are on the Google Cloud, careers in the cloud, etc. So I think you all know what we do. We do training. We do live online streaming training just like this in a sometimes very different format. But the goal here is to really kind of get your questions asked and answered, trying to get you a sense of what we're doing, and to learn more about Google and the opportunities therein. So with that, Dan, why don't you just tell us a little about yourself and what you've been doing and how you got to the Google Cloud, and that will be a good start.
Sure. Okay. Well, probably most relevant in terms of like what I've been doing with regards to Google Cloud is for the last couple of years, maybe it's been 3 years now. I've been writing certification guides for Google.
Yep.
And for Wiley, the publisher. So I've written 3 of the official study guides: one for the Associate Cloud Engineer exam, one for the Professional Architect, and one for the Data Engineer exam.
Yeah.
So I've been, just really deep into Google. Most of my work, probably for the last couple of decades, has been mostly data focused. So everything from data warehousing and analytics to machine learning. How I got into Google Cloud was kind of interesting. I was actually working in another cloud. I was working in AWS when I was doing work in genetics and computational biology, and I was doing some research stuff, and I was using a lot of like Spark clusters and stuff like that, had big data sets to work with, and I was getting really frustrated with networking issues and just a lot of setup that I needed to do in AWS just to get, just to run some workloads. And so somebody mentioned, oh, hey, there's this new Google Cloud thing. This was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. And so I, checked it out, and I was immediately bitten by the bug. I mean, it was so much easier. I was able to get my stuff running. It's like the workloads I needed to run were like what Google was designed to do. So it's a really good fit. And I still work with AWS. I still work with Google. I like them both. They're both really good. They're complementary in a lot of ways. It just happened to be that like what I was working on was a better fit for Google at the time.
Needs the moment. Yeah, one of the things I've drawn an analogy to, because I'm not the technologist, but I have logged in. We do use both, as a matter of fact, and I analogize it to the days back in the day when I started playing with Microsoft Fly, or whatever it's called, where you can pretend to fly an airplane. Where little
cool.
joystick back in over 15 years ago, and then cute little quick story is a friend of mine was a Brit, and he said he flew to London that night before. I said, what do you mean? He set Microsoft Flight Simulator at night, and he had it running through the morning, and then he woke up to land the plane. So that's an example of somebody who's truly immersed in the technology. But my analogy is that, sort of like flying a Piper Cub on that was what it seems to be. And then it's quote easy. And then you click on Learjet or Boeing 747, and you realize you have no idea what you're doing. And that was kind of my experience in looking at Amazon. AWS is more like, I don't even know where to begin, and our team has been using primarily for our own servers Google Cloud, and it seemed to be that you don't need an astrophysics degree in order to run on the Google Cloud. Now, is that how you look at it? Is that sort of what you were indicating?
Yeah, it's basically like, with AWS, it's like you get these really like fine-grained building blocks.
Right.
So it's great if you're an enterprise and you want a lot of control over, say, your network security and things like that, and you want to build everything from the ground up. With Google, it's like you can do all that. You can, you have a lot of fine-grained control. But if you want to start with a bunch of useful defaults and,
Right.
for example, take advantage of the fact that Google has a global network.
Right.
So it's not the same, there's some easier things to do in Google if you're working across multiple regions than if you're working at, say, AWS. So,
Right.
so if you want to start at, like with larger building blocks, like bigger Lego blocks, and assemble your stuff and get your workloads running, then, Google's great at that. But if you need something, I don't know, some very specific thing, like, well, I'm sure by now there's better like integration with like Microsoft identity services and things like that. 8 years ago, that wasn't the case. So, I think there's some convergence. But yeah, basically what you're saying is, yeah, it's easier to get started with Google Cloud, and I've seen other people express that opinion too. So
years ago, also, I think it must be about 8 or 10 years ago, we were looking to get some AWS things going, and we talked to people, and frankly, it was in India, so the price structure is very different for an Indian consultant typically. And I remember them saying, their consulting fees would be $250 an hour, and I said, "Well, are you flexible?" He says, "No, we're way too busy." So once you're credentialed in these areas, you find out, and this is one of the values of credentialing in general, is not just that you know your stuff, but that you can set yourself apart. So, I think some of the things that, and whether it's as a consultant or as an engineer inside of a company, talk to us a little about some of the certifications that you've worked on, or some of the ones that that the Google Cloud provides. And where do you think the best way to start, of course, at the beginning, but just tell us a little about that, if you will.
Sure. Well, Google has, I don't know, maybe about 6 or 8 certifications. There's one that's around sort of Google workspace and collaboration, and that I don't know much about, so I'll leave that one off to the side.
Sure.
But there's one associate level, which is designed for people that maybe have like about 6 months experience with Google, and that's the associate cloud engineer. And that's really good for getting started. If you're new to the cloud and or you have some like understanding of basic cloud concepts, and you want to like apply your knowledge to Google, that's a great one to go for, because it's very broad, but it's not too deep. So it's like the mile wide, few inches deep kind of certification. And for that, you need to understand like compute resources, like Compute Engine, App Engine, Cloud Functions, Kubernetes Engine, storage systems, everything from cloud storage to Spanner and Bigtable and BigQuery, some networking, basic network setup, hybrid computing.
Yeah.
So very broad. Again, it's a great place to start because it's not deep, and the test is more about like the mechanics, like how do you set something up using the console? How do you set up a VM or a instance group? The professional exams, like the data engineer and the architect, build on that. So you need to know the same kind of things, but then you also need to know more in the sense that you need to be able to go from a business problem to a solution. Whereas with the associate level, you can assume that maybe you're working with somebody a little more experienced who translate the business problem into technical requirements for you. With the professional level, you've got to be able to translate business requirements into technical. So for example, like with data engineering, you might have to be, you might be talking to people who are, say, in marketing, and they want to do customer segmentation, and you need to be able to figure out as a data engineer, what does that mean in terms of like what kind of ML algorithms do I need to use and what kind of data do I need? So it's deeper into the domain. So they're narrower. So these are like deep and slightly narrow. So like with data engineer, there's not as much about networking. If you're an architect, it's still wide and deep. So that's kind of tough. The other thing I would just mention about data engineer is that probably, I don't know, maybe 25% of the questions are about machine learning. And this is independent of Google Cloud. So this is just machine learning in general. So if you're, very experienced in data engineering, you know how to move data, clean it up, do ETL kind of stuff, that's great. That's a good prep. If you're not familiar with machine learning concepts and machine learning workflows and pipeline, things like that definitely want to look into that.
Is there a gap, you think? I mean, you mentioned 6 months worth of experience for the foundations or fundamentals programs. Is there, in your experience, not just as a sort of a Google requirements period of time, but what's logical? When you obviously the hands-on, the practical, the in the market kind of work is what gives you the skills, right? So just because you're sitting there and you've like, for example, for me, I mean, one would be shocked to know that I'm a certified Scrum Master. Well, I took the class, I passed the class, but I don't apply the class. So you don't really want me running your scrums, right, or your stand-ups.
Yeah.
So the question I have is really fundamental to the foundational to the Google Cloud fundamentals. Is it really you just jump from one to the next, or do you really need to apply it for months and a few years before you really take that next step in your experience?
I would say, first of all, that kind of question is probably the most common question I get when people ping me with questions. And basically, the idea is, oftentimes it's framed as, "Hey, I did the associate cloud engineer or data engineer exam. How do I get real world experience? How do I get in? How do I get the job?" And there is a gap. So yeah, I totally agree with you and say yes, you're absolutely right. There is a gap. Getting a certification is great. That is a step in the process.
Right.
But really, that shows like a hiring manager one piece of the puzzle, which is like, okay, you are credentialed, which means you have the domain knowledge and you can pass a test.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily demonstrate that you have had hands-on experience, because there are some people that are really good at taking tests.
Right.
And so,
as I demonstrated with the Scrum exam.
Right. So what I often recommend to people, it's like, if you're not working in Google Cloud or AWS, wherever what you're shooting for is, find a project to work on. There are tons of open source projects out there that you can just pick, like just stand up a project in Google Cloud, learn how to set up a VM, learn how to deploy code, learn how to do infrastructure as a service. So just find something that you can do. And the great thing is, if you're working with like an open source project, or you're deploying something to Google Cloud and you're using infrastructure as a service, that's all code. You can put that in your own GitHub repo so that you can send that along with your resume and point it's like, hey, this is what I've done. So really, that's the critical thing. So what are you interested in? And I'm stealing this tip, or taking this tip, from Brodus Palmer, who's a career coach. He teaches Google courses on like Linux Academy, and he tells people it's like, research the company you're interested in. So if you're interested in working for, whoever, you want to work on Disney Plus, or you want to work at a research institute or something, find out, what kind of work they do, what are they interested in, what kind of problems are they solving, and then find a problem in that domain that shows, oh, I can bring value to this company. So that's another thing in terms of how do you pick something.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Great. Go ahead, son.
Really, totally. I think Brodus is right on the mark on that one. And if you're still stumped, you're not quite sure, you don't have a specific company, then I would say, if you're interested in data engineering, go out to Kaggle. They've got a bunch of, Kaggle competitions for machine learning. Find some data sets there, build some stuff, but do it all in Google and, use infrastructure as code, or use some of like the AI services. Just, have something that you can point people to. Yeah.
No, it's excellent. This is actually just to since I'm the pitch man, I just want to point out that in January, check on our site, guys. If you look at starweaver.com and look at the on air, you'll see that Dan's got two programs coming up, two live streaming courses, Google Cloud Fundamentals, and also the Google Cloud Professional Architect Exam Prep course. And in concert with all of that, you'll see something called Star Labs. They're all being launched rather quickly in January, which is all what Dan's discussing. It's the hands-on project-based work where the instructor is going to put up a challenge, and within half an hour to 45 minutes, you're going to be finished with the challenge. You have to build something. That will be something you could then take and share on your GitHub. So the goal here is to be able to help you demonstrate, and through learn by doing, and then be able to take those projects and demonstrate them out to the world. So yourself and also to any other employer, et cetera. So yeah, the doing is what this is all about. Dan, obviously, you know a lot about that. I mean, the compensation, Dan, from what I've been looking, because I'm not, someone in that field, but the compensation for data engineers is kind of at the $90,000 starting level, and on up to senior software engineers, 120 or more. Obviously, depends on what country you're in, but you'd say it's pretty well paid, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. For the last couple of years, I had somebody, I can never remember who does like a certification survey and gets salaries. Last couple of years, the Google Cloud Architect has been the top certification in terms of annual salary. Certified data engineer, I don't know where that falls, like, in the top 10 or whatever, but that's definitely a high paying one. And that is, I would bet, if I had to put money on this, that would be the one that's going to grow the fastest.
The
There's just
data
huge demand.
engineer.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's a huge demand for architects too, but my feeling is the pandemic has pushed companies faster to innovate and to adapt to a new situation.
Mm-hmm.
And data analytics is
Mm-hmm.
a really useful tool for figuring
Mm-hmm.
out what to do and how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect there's going to be just increasing demand for data engineers. But if you are new to it, then cloud engineer is still a great way to get in.
Yeah.
That's a good first step.
Well, one thing that's also fascinating to me is obviously post COVID, obviously COVID, post COVID, one way or another has pushed people to working remotely.
Yeah.
And obviously the obvious fact is that we are now collaborating with video, like we did
Yeah.
with texting
Yeah.
and phone, a few years ago. I mean, I've been doing the video as you have been for a long time, but now it's everyone. So now the reason I brought this up is that, we've been dealing with various states, Wyoming, for example, kind of a small state in the scheme of things, physically large, but they're looking to get people who are qualified in specialized skills. You don't need to fly from Wyoming to Texas to Austin to work in Texas in order to work in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Oh yeah.
some of these not only are they transferable, they're transferable around the world. You don't need to pick up and move these days, and often no one's sitting as it used to be. You're sitting in a network operations center.
Mm-hmm.
There is no network operations center you're going to go sit in anymore. There is the cloud, and you can be sitting at home doing that.
Right, exactly. I mean, we're all tapping into Google Cloud from wherever we are. We might tap into different regions and stuff, but it's essentially, it doesn't matter. Of course, there's always some sort of spontaneous collaboration that happens, like when you're in an office. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I've worked remotely for many years,
Mm-hmm.
and it's gotten progressively easier. But no, one of the last projects I worked on when I was in academia was a collaboration with 4 or 5 different, teams at different universities across the country, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just standard. Like we got together maybe twice a year,
Mm-hmm.
physically in the same place, but otherwise, we did all of our work
Mm-hmm.
remotely. And so yeah, like you were saying, like for us, it's kind of we've been doing this for a while, but for a lot of companies, they're seeing like, oh yeah, we can do it too.
Yeah.
And it's definitely yeah, you definitely don't have to move to do this. I'm in Portland, Oregon,
Right.
and I'm just before I got on this call, I was working with folks who are in Chicago.
Right.
And by the end of the day, I'll be working with somebody who's in Belfast, Ireland.
Yeah. Now,
So,
you have a lot of obviously genomics and health oriented. I call it health oriented, but just genomics and data sets. But you look at now. I remember how many years ago, but Google decided to open up a variety of its data sets to the public
Yeah.
for research. Obviously sanitized and no PII included. But when you're looking at this, and again we talked about this, you mentioned the idea, and obviously we'll do this in our own Star Labs. But people now saying, look, I want to build something in my GitHub. Where are we going to turn to for data? Because we're not going to turn to our families. We're going to turn to the cloud. And does Google provide let's say this, pretty transparent places where you can start tapping into that data? Do you need a strategic relationship with Google? How do you go about grabbing that data for use like this?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, you don't need a strategic relation, especially like with BigQuery. They have public data sets,
Mm-hmm.
which are really good, which are all over the place. There's a bunch of COVID data sets now. There's, like economics data. I'm trying to think. I'm drawing
There was
a blank.
health.
Like
There was health data. I know for a while because they were. Personally, I think there's been a lost opportunity. Maybe not, but for people having smarter watches, whether it's measuring your temperature, your blood pressure, and all the other things that we could be understanding where's the risk groups in this country. So I wonder that kind of thing. We can start looking at what age sets, what maybe you can get the genomics where, you look at some of the Ancestry.com or 23andMe data sets. So I'm wondering how much of this is really available, and is Google not the only provider, but where would you go to find a good provider of data when you want to do these examples for a job or for your own interests?
Sure. Well, fortunately, there's a lot of options. So if you're working with Google, especially with BigQuery, there's a lot of public data sets there.
Mm-hmm.
AWS is another great resource. They have, I forget what they call them, like basically public data sets. But if you Google AWS public cloud data sets, you can find a bunch. In the United States, data.gov is a federal website which has a bunch of data that's collected by the federal government. So if you're interested in like U.S. Census data, labor statistics, things like that, that's a great one. The WHO, World Health Organization, has health data, again, globally, something like that. And the UN also has, I can't remember it, I was looking at it the other day, actually looking for data sets, Paul, for that, like you were mentioning in January, being able to do it, some data sets. So I was looking at some sample data there. If you're into machine learning and you want some like tried and true data sets that people have used a lot, is it UC Irvine? I think UC Irvine has a machine learning repository. Again, if you just Google like University of California machine learning data sets, that'll probably be one of the first ones that come up. So there's definitely a bunch of places, and again, any major, like I'm sure the EU has data sets comparable to like data.gov in the US. So
I'm taking notes.
And feel free if you're stumped, if you have a particular question, like you're interested in grabbing some data sets and you're not sure where to go, feel free to ping me.
We'll provide your information in the recording so people can get access. But definitely, everyone, you should participate in some of these. The bottom line is that certainly maybe in high school, maybe in college, certainly not in graduate school. The academic, the theoretical is fine. But if you got to get, if you're looking in the real world. And I mean any real world, whether it's an entrepreneurial startup or it's a massive company, you have to have practical experience. And the only way to do that is by practice, right?
Yes. Yep.
And I think that's what we're going to be offering out is kind of mini, we call them moonshots, like little things that are going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. You can build on them so you can actually begin to share that as well.
Right. Exactly. And there are some, like if you're familiar with Google and you've done like Coursera or some of the online courses, you might have come across Quick Labs, which Google is great about, like setting up exercises on Quick Labs. And that's like a good building block. And what I understand, like people, again, have shared with me the feeling like, yeah, that's great to like do a like level, kind of like a unit test, do you understand this concept? But it's not like a bigger project with integration with other systems and things like that, because that's not the purpose of a lot of the exercises in Quick Labs. So I think, Paul, what you're describing is sort of like something that complements what Quick Labs does, which is more like unit tests, and what you're describing is something more analogous to like a large-scale integration test where you're putting a bunch of pieces together and solving a like more lifelike problem.
Yeah, and I think the ability to, what you've described, and obviously sort of GitHub's revolutionized this, right? The ability to show someone your work, right? The ability to create something and then share it and then to demonstrate that your skills are there. Because, I can tell you, when we've hired recently in the past week, we actually have hired 3 new developers, and it was very simple. We put out a job listing. We found some very interesting people. We put out, for a bunch of people, I'd say we had 30, that we put out the challenge, specific challenge, and the people who responded demonstrated, wow, these guys are great. And so they've joined our team, and very impressive because we saw their work. We saw what they did, and we saw actually they were willing to take the challenge. We weren't looking to abuse them. We weren't looking to take we really wanted, if you can complete this challenge, and by the way, the challenge was ambiguous. It was deliberately confusing. So, which is kind of like, from what my experience is, I was talking to Prabha, one of our directors, just the other day, and it's like we try to provide clarity, but it's kind of, you're not going to get clarity in your workaday world, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Now that's a really good point. Yeah, ambiguity comes with the territory.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have try to be very clear in what I'm looking for and require, et cetera. But I think what Prabha said to me, and maybe with any all the Microsofties out there, this is all due respect, is you go out and get out of, he was at Microsoft for 25 years before joining the Allen Institute in Seattle. He said that, you go into a meeting at Microsoft and some business guy says, I want this, this, and this, and everyone goes, okay, we're going to go figure it out. There's no clear specification. Here's a problem, go figure it out. So that's the world you're going to live in as a Google Cloud engineer or an architect or any function within the universe of technology. So I think that's
Yeah, and I think that's really important for all of us to understand. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but even,
Mhm.
I even have to like acknowledge it's like I'm still constantly learning stuff, and it's both because there's ambiguity, right? I mean,
Right,
I don't understand the business issues, and I need to have skills that allow me to like identify, okay, who are the key people, who can I talk to,
right.
how long do I spend kind of, drilling down into it on my own, and when do I ping somebody else? Those are kind of soft skills that are really important.
Yeah.
And I would say the other key soft skill that is important is just understanding and being able to constantly learn.
Hmm.
Uh, so you might get your cloud engineer certification this year, but next year, even though you have that certification, Google's going to probably come up with 6 different things, new
Right,
services in that time that are going to be important to whatever it is you're working on that you're going to need to learn
right.
outside the certification process. And maybe it'll show up the next time you renew,
Yeah.
show up on the exam, but you need to know it anyway for your work. So just learning, like kind of making it part of like your like work regimen. It's like,
Yeah.
you allocate a certain number of hours every week to learn new stuff, or go check the Google Cloud blog to see what new is
Yeah.
new, that kind of thing.
It's absolutely, and I think it's obviously we're all in the technology-oriented field, but I come at it from a business point of view. Dan, obviously you come at it from a technology point of view, and this is kind of what we do as a business, trying to help bridge that gap. But interestingly enough, my brother is a doctor, and he once said to me, he's very competent and accomplished doctor. At the same time, the technology is beginning to overtake every field. So he's a hand surgeon and a shoulder surgeon, but you think that was used to be, as my father used to say, that's like, you need chisels and hammers, but obviously that's how it was. But now it's,
Yeah.
microsurgery and all sorts of robotics and things of that sort that require levels of acumen. I think you've raised a really interesting point that I'd like to wrap up on, is the business skills, is that is understanding how to ask the question of what you don't know. Years ago, and I don't want to monopolize the point, we have done extensive training in the finance sector. And so we did a lot of training for the big banks in their tech teams. Why? Because we were teaching finance to the tech people, because they didn't know what a derivative was. They didn't know what a mortgage-backed security was, but they were being screamed at, to be honest, by some trader who said, I need this, this, and this, and this. And the person may have been a wonderful software engineer, but didn't have an idea what the business domain was
Yeah.
really about.
Yep.
And so I
Yeah.
think that part of it, so if you're going to be in the supply chain bit, if you're going to work for Walmart, if you're going to work for Amazon in its retail business, understanding that and having, as you said, the ability to ask those questions is a non-trivial skill.
Yes, it is, and sometimes the different fields can be, different levels of demand on your sort of domain knowledge.
Yeah.
So you have to really watch that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. I was whatever decades into this, and I switched over, started working in life sciences, and yeah, no, I mean, I was taking graduate courses on that for years
Yeah.
to kind of just get a foundation so that I can understand what people are talking about. So,
Right, but
yeah,
if you were now suddenly thrust into, we did some training for a clinical research organization, and if someone said to you, "Hey, Dan, we want you to look at this data on the clinical research, but maybe it's not on the clinical side, but it's on their supply chain side, or or whatever," you'd have to get a bit of a step up. Maybe the CRO world, but you'd have to get a step up on what is the business process here. How does it
right.
work? Why am I building this, and how am I going to make it work for the people who need to function in the business?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And because that informs how we build things. Like when we think about design questions, it's like so much of what I do these days is like doing design work, especially as I mentioned earlier around data. And a lot of times I have to go back to the domain experts and like, well, what is this thing?
Right.
Like this chunk of data looks bizarre, and then there's like sometimes this long story, and it's very historical. It's like,
Right.
well, we used to do it this way, and blah blah blah, and then there was an acquisition, and another company's data merged
Right.
data, blah blah blah, and it's like that is like a critical piece of information, and if I didn't dig it up, I would have maybe designed it a different way, and
Right.
I would have messed up the whole process.
Well, it's also interesting because I think that if you're an employer in the field, and I can tell you from my point of view, if someone's passionate about my field, let's say, we're hiring someone in our business, which is education. If they have no interest in education, if they haven't even thought to look at our website, haven't thought about how we do things and think about how do we get people to learn better, then I don't think they're going to be very effective for us because they're just, as Sean sometimes says, a slinging code. Slinging code is not what you do. You have to solve a business problem in order to be successful in a career, I think. And, that's so this kind of merging, as we've sort of said, there's the technology and then there's the business domain. Nice part about technology is you can go from domain to domain. Sometimes people in a business domain are kind of stuck there. If you were in the retail business, you're kind of stuck there. But if you're a technologist, you can jump from domain to domain, but you have to be aware that they are different.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. They are definitely different, and we have to ask questions. And one of the hardest things I've had to overcome was this hesitation to ask people questions, like either I didn't want to bother them, everybody's busy, or oh, I'm going to look stupid, and I'm not stupid, right? I just don't know this domain, and it's and people I have found over and over again are incredibly helpful. They want to help. They, if somebody is in insurance or retail or whatever for 20 years, they really like it. They know a lot, and I have found those people are just incredibly willing to share, and they're not judgmental. They're not like thinking, oh, Dan doesn't know what he's talking about. Why did we hire this? Guy.
Right.
So definitely I would say don't hesitate to ask questions.
Yeah, one story on my side, I tell too many stories, but we did training for Bank of America with their capital markets technology people. And the senior people in technology said, our people know everything about mortgage-backed securities. We need to do an advanced course in mortgage-backed securities. 12 people was at Rockefeller Center. Remember this, I sat in the back of the classroom, and for the first 2 hours, started at 8, at 10 o'clock we took the break, there was not one word. Because they were talking about IOPOs, strip securities, and literally I just walked up to the instructor and said, let's go back to fundamentals. And he started with, okay, does everyone know what a mortgage is? Okay, does everyone know what a cash flows of the mortgage is? No. Why is the first amount interest and why is it later principal? Does everyone know that the difference that I'm describing changes the volatility of a portfolio of mortgages? Now that little description takes you way up the curve. You can start with the fundamentals, and as long and one person raised their hand and said, "Is my home equity mortgage home equity loan a mortgage?" Great question. Great question. But if you can answer, so don't, as Dan just said, everyone, please ask those questions. I say no. There's no such thing as a stupid question, because pretending you know something that you don't, or you're not confident is a very important thing as well. It's about really getting, in the collaborative world of business today, whether someone's senior like Dan or someone's junior like any of you might be, or maybe you're senior, asking a question is a sign of interest. It's a sign of passion. It's a sign of you care about your work. So, and
it goes both ways. I mean, just this morning I was dealing with an AWS credentials issue kind of thing, and I just posted a question on Slack with some people I work with, and it was one of the, a software engineer who's probably been doing this for a couple years, knew exactly what the problem was, and he's like, this is what you need to do, and and I did what he said, and it solved the problem, and I got back on track. So so you never know.
Good stuff.
It all. So
it's great. It's a great field to be in. I think everyone's excited about it because there is so much collaboration. As long as you communicate, ask questions, collaborate. Senior, as Dan was just pointing out, a senior asking someone who's more junior asking someone more senior. It used to be hierarchical organizations. We're very flat organizations now, and I think that's one of the things that makes me so energized by being in the, I'm sort of the old guy, but when I work with people, I just feel young because it is about change and about exciting new things.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So much better now. And it's definitely, as Paul said, everywhere I've worked for, last 10 or 12 years has been very flat. And I really like that because, again, it doesn't matter where you are in sort of like your career path. I mean, stuff that other people don't know, and you bring value to the project, whatever you're working on. So I think that's important to remember.
Thanks, Dan. It's been wonderful talking to you. And everyone, definitely check us out. Check Dan out on January 2020. He'll be doing labs. He'll be doing courses, a lot of exciting stuff. And hopefully it'll help you become a better you, if that's the right way to put it. Thanks, Dan.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Take care.